Welcome everyone to Space Analog Stories. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Shawna Pandya. Shawna is a scientist-astronaut candidate with Project PoSSUM, a physician, aquanaut, speaker, martial artist, advanced scuba diver, skydiver, pilot in training, and VP of Immersive Medicine with Luxsonic Technologies and fellow of the Explorers Club. Shawna has degrees in neuroscience, space, and medicine. Welcome, Shawna.
Thank you so much for having me on your wonderful adventure, Jess. Really excited to be here.
Thanks so much, Shawna. So could you start maybe by just giving us a little bit of a background on how your love for space first started and how it's led to your involvement now in space-related work?
Yeah, and you know, it's actually very poetic, the timing of your asking, because like a lot of us in the space sector, my love of space started with the night sky. When I was little, my parents would take me and my brother camping. They would take us across Western Canada and the Northwestern United States, and you're just privy to these wonderful night skies where you're away from the city lights and you see the spiral arm of the Milky Way just, you know, bright, you know, lighting up the night sky, and it's very inspiring. And so the reason I say that it's poetic is because I'm actually down at the Jasper Dark Sky Festival this weekend talking about space and space medicine. And so that for me was the start. You know, it's a very human and very fundamental part of being human to look up at that sky and just wonder what's out there. What if we went there? And that was the very start of it for me.
That's amazing. I think looking at the stars just evokes the imagination like nothing else. So could you tell us a little bit about the work you do as a citizen astronaut?
Yeah, and so in my life, as you can glean from the title, I like to say that every day is like a box of chocolates. You just don't know what you're going to get. And so on the PoSSUM, and we also are now known as the International Institute of Astronautical Sciences. So if I say IIAS or PoSSUM, they're the same thing. So I wear many hats. I, as you say, am a scientist-astronaut candidate and have been for 5 years in the space world. As I'm sure your listeners and viewers know, we love our acronyms. So PoSSUM stands for Polar Suborbital Science of the Upper Mesosphere. And we get to do, our initial mandate started with a very Earth-based one, and we were our initial mandate was to use suborbital flight to study noctilucent clouds, so clouds that are a relatively new meteorological phenomenon on the meteorological record, only around for maybe 150-ish years, thought to be a marker of climate change, and they're becoming more prevalent and coming down to exist at lower latitudes now. And so we wanted to know more about these clouds, their structure, their formation. And so that was the initial mandate. And so from there, you know, there was an initial tremendous interest and success with the program. So from the ground school and the interest around noctilucent clouds, we've evolved into commercial spacesuit testing and zero-G, commercial spacesuit testing in water crash landing scenarios, EVA, so there's another acronym, extravehicular activities, spacesuit testing. We've done that with the Canadian Space Agency, and then several other hats I wear. I'm the lead instructor of the Operational Space Medicine course, as well as the director of the IIAS Space Medicine Group.
That is a lot of stuff right there. That's
yes, yeah, that's the condensed version.
So, and also, could you tell us what your experience was like as an aquanaut?
Oh gosh, how do I even put into words how amazing it was? It was amazing, in a nutshell. And so the Aquanaut designation came from a mission called Neptune, yet another acronym, stands for Nautical Experiments in Physiology, Technology, and Underwater Exploration. The best part of everything I've done, whether, you know, related to space, to atmospheric science, medicine, or aquanautics, is the crews and the teams that you work with and build along the way. And this was another citizen scientist mission in the aquanautic sphere. And the crew, it was 5 people, including myself, Americans and Canadians. We had worked together. We'd been to survival school. We really got along well. And so we said, okay, well, what if we did the Aquanaut thing? It's been a bucket list item for most of us. And, it was it's so hard to say I have a favorite mission to date because they're so wonderful for so many reasons. But this one was just such a labor of love, like putting together the science over the better part of a year, nailing and ironing out the logistics, going through the ethics review, collecting the data, seeking technology partners, or organizing outreach like you did, talking to schools across the world, actually living underwater, and then surfacing at the end of 5 days and just realizing we wished it was 5 days longer. And even going through the post-mission debrief and the results and parsing those, every part of it, that it was, 10 out of 10 would recommend, would do it again.
It sounds incredible, and probably the most like a real space environment, because you're in that hostile underwater. You can't take your helmet off. You can't obviously breathe, and you're floating a little bit like you would in space. So kind of just to get back to like medicine in space. So we're all aware of some of the difficulties and challenges with microgravity, like bone density issues and eyesight problems. What are some other challenges, some of the things that maybe people are not as aware of?
Yeah, so I'm going to borrow from our colleagues at NASA. And so they talk about, when we talk about exploration class missions, so going beyond low Earth orbit, they talk about the big 5 challenges. So one of them obviously is altered gravity, isolation and confinement, increased distance from Earth, increased radiation, and then everything else which falls under hostile environments. So that might just include something as simple as extreme temperatures, altered day-night cycles, and of course lunar dust, which is very sharp and gets everywhere and poses a real hazard with respect to irritation if it gets on the skin or lungs.
So obviously all of these would be a huge concern for a future mission to Mars, because the journey to get there is obviously microgravity. Once you get to Mars itself, it obviously does have some gravity, but how are just the things we take for granted gonna be different on Mars, like medically speaking? Obviously you have the radiation problems, and you have the fact that you can't breathe the atmosphere. If someone injured themselves out in the field, how would you deal with such situations? How would you do an operation? All these things.
Oh, you're asking all the right questions here, and I'm just so thrilled to talk about all of this. I think the grin says it all. Yeah, these are the things that keep me awake at night, and I keep awake. Anyone who's excited about exploration class human spaceflight missions. So to take your questions in turn, there's so many ways to think about this. So starting with the risk, what risks do we accept? How do we think about risks? So again, deferring to NASA, they have a risk matrix that looks at probability versus severity. So for example, if something's high likelihood, high probability to occur, you have to mitigate it. You have your set parameters of what you would accept in terms of mission risk as well as crew risk. You also have tools at your disposal. You have modeling and simulation tools that help you based on previous spaceflight data, as well as the medical tools you would have in your kit that would help you decide what you would need to take with you. So for example, there's the integrated medical model, which looks at inputs from previous missions, as well as extrapolates based on the duration, as well as number of crew you would have on the mission. And then there's also what we call the MedPrat, which is a mouthful. It stands for Medical Extendable Dynamic Probability Risk Assessment Tool, which is why we call it the MedPrat. So those are all tools we have when we think about how we think about going to Mars. And then, for example, we have to think about the practicalities. So we talked about distance from Earth. So when you're up on the International Space Station, it's a relative luxury. You are 3.5 hours from evacuation to Kazakhstan if you need to. The further you go away from Earth, the more you have to deal with time delay. So if there's any Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy fans out there, you'll recognize that famous Douglas Adams quote that space is big. Space is vastly, hugely, so mind-bogglingly big you wouldn't believe it. And so how that translates into practicalities is that by the time you go to the moon, there's a 3-second one-way communications delay. So it's inconvenient, but not impossible. And then by the time you go to Mars, in its furthest alignment with Earth, it's a 23-minute one-way communication delay. So imagine you have someone who is hemorrhaging out due to an unfortunate and unforeseen circumstance on Mars, and you need help. You can't wait 46 minutes to complete the conversation with ground control on Earth. So you really have to increase the self-sufficiency and the in-situ capabilities of that crew. So for example, the crew medical officer on the International Space Station has 40 hours of medical training. So as you can imagine, by the time we go to Mars, we want a fully trained crew physician, as well as, one who is a jack of all trades, who has primary care abilities, emergency care, basic surgical skills. And then along with that, what basic surgical capabilities do we have? How do we go about surgical decision-making? Do we just mandate that anyone going to Mars needs to have their appendix taken out before they go? There's precedent for that. There is a Chilean settlement in Antarctica where anyone over the age of 6 needs to have their appendix taken out to live there because it's over 600 miles to definitive medical care. So that was a lot, but oh my gosh, there's so many ways to think about packing for Mars from a medical sense.
Wow, yeah, wow, that's really interesting. I didn't even consider things like the removal of the appendix. That's
yeah.
So yeah, I guess that kind of the Chilean thing that you mentioned relates back to how can we use like analog missions here on Earth to help support the research for such space missions and medical.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, so as I'm sure your viewers are aware, when we talk about analogs, we talk about being analogous in some way to the spaceflight environment, whether we're replicating zero gravity, altered gravity, isolation, and confinement. So for example, referring back to the Neptune mission again, that was an example of the isolation and confinement. And we were at the Jules Undersea Lodge. We were 20 feet underwater. So part of it was isolated and confined, but the nice thing of being only 20 feet deep is if we needed to emergency egress to the surface, there would be no decompression period. And so as a brief primer as to what decompression means is it that the deeper we go, after a certain point, gases in our blood are in dissolution in our tissues, and then we have to decompress at a steady, slow rate to allow those gases to come out of solution at a safe rate, because if we don't, then we risk them coming out as bubbles and lodging in places that are dangerous, like our joints, or even, heaven forbid, our lungs and brains, which could be fatal. And so just down the road from Jules Undersea Lodge is the Aquarius Reef Base, also in the Florida Keys, 13 miles away. That is where NASA runs its NEMO, or NASA Extreme Environment Mission Operations missions, where they train some of their astronaut crews. And even though it's 13 miles away, it's 30 feet deeper at about 50 feet. So when you were that deep, after 24 hours, you are considered to be in saturation, and you need to decompress for 15 hours and 47 minutes before you can head to the surface, lest you risk a dive injury. So think about that. You can be on the International Space Station at 450 kilometers above the Earth and still have quicker access to medical care in Kazakhstan than you can be by being 50 feet below the ocean surface, surface and needing to wait 16 hours to decompress before getting to definitive medical care. So coming to your question, why do we use analogs? Because space is hard, space is expensive, and space is risky. And so we don't want the first time we practice any type of procedure, medical or otherwise, to be in space. And so the value of analogs is we can study various aspects, for example, psychodynamics, crew dynamics, in these isolated and confined austere environments. And then also see how we need to prepare, how we need to change our preparation as we get ready for human spaceflight to the moon and beyond.
Yeah, I mean, it's so important to practice before you go out into a real space hostile environment. So can you share with us a funny story from one of your missions here on Earth?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we talk, oh gosh, there's so many, but I think I'll share one of, I talked about water and its value for post-landing egress. And so what we do in that scenario is we test another type of spacesuit, IVA, intravehicular activity. So it's kind of like having a second life support system in your spacecraft. And so in this scenario, we're simulating having a capsule, an Orion capsule, splash down into the ocean. And then we have to egress from the craft or from a parachute in the simulation and see how our IVA suit handles the water and then get into the emergency rescue raft. And so in this scenario, I was simulating coming off a parachute harness, and what I had to do was pull the seals on my spacesuit, deploy my portable flotation device, and then swim over to the raft and climb up. And it's supposed to be super simple, but I learned the hard way that you are absolutely, it's absolutely critical to pull the seals all the way on your spacesuit, because if you don't, your spacesuit fills up with water up to your chest, and then you have to climb up the rope ladder with not just your body weight, not just the weight of the spacesuit, but a spacesuit full of water. And it is a lot harder than it sounds. So that's my life lesson, and that's my pearl to anyone out there with a spacesuit in the water, is make sure you pull those seals. It found out the hard way. Definitely.
Yeah,
that it's important.
So if you had a friend who wasn't at all interested in space, how would you get them excited about space?
Oh gosh. I think at the end of the day is that there is space for all of us, pun intended. And so I would want to know more about what excites them. Is it art? Is it exploration? Is it physics? Is it technology? Is it medicine? Because space really needs all of us. It's not just the pilots or the engineers or the scientists who need to go to space. It's the storytellers, the ones who can, poetically express why it's so important. Even if you have no interest in human spaceflight, the infrastructure and knowledge and empowerment that simply having telecommunications and Earth observation satellites in space, the benefit that we derive from everything we've learned in space exploration, from water filtration devices that we can use in rural villages in Kenya, to atmospheric scrubbers that can help extend the life of produce here on Earth. There's so many ways. The list is endless. So I would just want to know what excites them about life in general, because there's absolutely a tie into space.
Yeah, completely. So if you had the chance to go to Mars, would you want to go?
Oh gosh, yeah, I absolutely. I would want to be the one who sets up the medical capabilities there, and be the one who keeps people healthy on Mars.
And so on your journey there, what one non-digital item would you want to take with you, like a luxury item?
Oh gosh, can I bring my parakeets? Anyone who follows me on social media knows that outside of space, I love my birds, and so whether they want to or not, they'd be coming with me if there's a choice. And for anyone who has a quick 15 seconds after watching this, Google pigeons in zero gravity. You won't be disappointed. It's been done.
I am definitely Googling that afterwards. That's actually something you mentioned, bringing your pets. It's something I've always been thinking about, is because I'm a huge animal lover, and I would want nothing more than to have like my pet dog there, or whatever your pet might be. But is that fair on the animal? That's the thing I'm not sure about yet. And I guess it's not a top priority perhaps for space research.
Well, everything we do in space is a trade-off. So when we talk about packing for space, there's several principles, and one of them is the backpacking principle. Because if you're going on a hike and you have a backpack, everything you bring with you is at the expense of something else. And it's similar for the pets question, because on the one hand, the morale boost is undeniable, but on the other hand, it's also extra resources, extra use of the life support system, extra food, as well as, the ethics of, we know that there's deleterious effects to bone and muscle health. Is it fair to subject an animal to that? And we do that to a certain extent. We've flown mice, we've flown wasps, we've flown fish to space. So there's a lot of discussion to be had around that. You know, and even as we're talking about it, I would feel bad if there's any deleterious effects my own pets would suffer going to space. I would also miss them lots on a mission to Mars, because that would be the order of years. So it's definitely something to think about. But I think you can also make a case for having the morale cat, for example, on Mars.
So obviously, apart from your pets, apart from your friends and family, and maybe the beauty and nature of Earth, what do you think you've missed the most about Earth?
Ooh, so I there's certain things that I try to bring with me everywhere in terms of comfort foods, and I think you may have seen when I started the recording, I'm drinking club soda. You can't have carbonated drinks in space, so I would have to cut out the club soda.
Nice. So, Shawna, what's next for you with regards to space or your training?
Oh gosh, yeah. So, you know, I think you're kind of ahead of the curve, because you are willingly going into isolation confinement. Most of the rest of the world has had it thrust upon them. So a lot of our courses for this year have been postponed to 2021, but that means in the background, I'm getting a lot of research done, a lot of virtual work done. And so I haven't really talked about the technology side yet, but you mentioned one of the hats I wear is with Luxsonic technology. So we're an immersive medicine, immersive technology company. So that translates into doing cool things like VR for medical education and training. And so one of the things that's keeping me busy these days is helping develop a medical training suite funded by the Canadian Space Agency to keep doctors' skills up on a mission to Mars. So, you know, pandemic or not, if where there's a will to just keep busy, I'll find a way.
Yeah, definitely. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with us today, and how can people follow you and your work?
Yeah, so I just wanted to say, Jess, what you're doing is amazing. You know, the initiative that you've taken, how you've gone from conception to execution, and you know, keeping in mind the operational aspect, the STEM and outreach aspect. You know, what you've done is incredible, and so props to you. You know, really thrilled to be a part of this in a small capacity. And I really hope that you're inspiring anyone who's an explorer at heart, which is all of us. So that's, you know, the last thing I want to say. And then for anyone who wants to find out more about me, please feel free to reach out online. So you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Shawna Pandya, SHAWNAPANDYA. Same Dr. Shawna Pandya, LinkedIn and Facebook, and also my website, shawnapandya.com.
Brilliant. And I'll put those links in the description of this video as well. Shawna, thank you so much for your time today. It's been really great chatting with you.
Thank you so much for having me, Jess.